Alright, I do believe we are live. What's happening, everyone? And welcome to another Sunday morning live stream. Today is going to be a super deep, geeky live stream on how I am creating and approaching the sound design for my hi-hat samples lately. I'm going to go ahead and try to find this stream on my channel so that I can chat if anyone tunes into the stream. And it looks like we are live. All right. What's happening, Ted? What's happening, Tony? What's happening, Wall? All right. What's happening, Grant? Thanks for tuning in, you guys. Let's see here. Can you hear me okay? And I'm going to go ahead and get a volume check by turning up the music a little louder in the background just to make sure that the levels are okay. You guys can let me know if you can hear that music and if you can hear my voice. We'll go ahead and get started today. All right. Can you guys hear what's coming through okay? We're going to start out today with some sound design using the Euro rack. And we're going to design some hi-hat samples from scratch. And then we're going to move over here to my PC, and I've got Ableton open, and this is where I'm doing some EQ work, and then we're going to be editing some samples over on this station as well. Then we're going to come over to, let's see here, we're going to come over to the Digitakt, and we're going to explore a couple of neat hi-hat techniques in the Digitakt. Levels are good. Thanks, guys. Right on. And we're also going to go inside of Ableton Live today on my Mac, and we're going to explore some of the ways and tools and techniques that I'm using to put together hi-hat loops as well. So we're going to be starting over here today, and what I want to do is I want to try to bring the camera in a bit closer to the actual modules so that you guys can see as well as we can manage that. I'm not really worried about you guys seeing me in this section of the stream today as much as I want you guys to be able to see the Euro rack system. Need to make an adjustment on my headphone cable here. Okay, fantastic. And let's see, room gets smaller and smaller. Yeah, it sure does. Alrighty there. Can you guys see the Euro rack okay? What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about hi-hats. Now, let's see here. As a sample based producer, I'm really, for those of you who have been watching my channel for, any amount of time, you know that I'm a really heavily sample based producer. And now, when we're talking about hi-hat samples specifically, like back in the 90s when people, early 90s, really late 80s as well, when there started to be commercially available, samplers for home use, and people we're starting to, actually sample sounds and loops and little bits and tidbits from earlier recordings, and it became a whole art form, like people who were using the MPC Live to create, not the MPC Live, excuse me, like the MPC 2000 or the early Akai samplers as well. I started out like in about 1987 with the Roland S50 sampler, and I've been sampling for like 20 some odd years now. One of the things that people really like about like sampling in that old school way, like, sampling from records or sampling from old cassette tapes and things like that, is sort of the vibe that you get in those sounds. When you sample off of let me get the camera just a little bit different as I'm doing this intro part still, guys. When you're, sampling off of those records and when you're sampling off of those tapes, you're not just sampling a sound. What you're sampling is really a vibe that everyone in the studio, was up to, and that vibe came through on that recording. You're sampling, different kind of mics that were used. These things were, recorded in all sorts of different studios. So depending on, where you take your samples from, if you're sampling from old vinyl and old cassettes and whatnot, you're really picking up a vibe there. And people who have done that type of, workflow really, often will wax philosophical about those days and sampling those kind of, vibey samples that really had kind of, a life and almost, I'm a synth geek, you guys, so like almost like a history, kind of in that sound that you're sampling off of that record. Um, so skip forward to like modern day, right? And we've got the most amazing tools that you could ever imagine, especially if you, were back then in the 90s when all we really wanted were some clean sounds and really clean, powerful drum machines and whatnot. Well, now we've got that kind of stuff. And people say that the new boxes are really clean and really powerful and sometimes almost too clean and almost too digital and almost too precise. And they sort of lack a little bit of that character and the vibe that we had in sampling some of these old school sounds in that old school way. For instance, speaking about one of the new modern drum machines, the Roland TR-8S, some people say that that particular machine is very clean and has a very clinical sound and not really at all like those classic, 90s type of drum sounds that a lot of us, grew up with when we started getting into electronic music. And that's what we're going to try to do today. I'm going to show you some techniques that I've been using to try to get some vibe and character and kind of, old school sampling type of sensibility in my hi-hat sounds specifically. Obviously, there's lots of different sounds that, we need when we're creating music, everything from drums to basses and synths to pads, and we can get lost in rabbit holes of sound design on any of those type of sounds. So I've been really getting in deep into a rabbit hole of designing new hi-hat sounds that have that sort of vibe and character and almost feel like they were sampled from old vinyl or old cassette tapes, trying to sort of embed a vibe and a feeling into the sounds themselves. Hey, what's happening, Robert? All right. Yeah, the emu. Oh my goodness. Okay, you guys, so let's see here. The very first thing that we're going to do today is we're going to start by creating some custom white noise to sample. I'm going to turn my air conditioner up. It's getting pretty warm today. All right, that's better. Okay, we're going to start by taking some noise sources and we're going to route those to an envelope. And we're going to take like some white noise and like some, like there's a noise synthesis model in the braids module from Mutable Instruments. I've got it set to the noise algorithm now. Let's go ahead and just take an output of this and let's route this into... Let's route this into a mixer for now so that we can combine a few different noise sources together. And what let's do is let's start with the noise source from braids here. Let's next up, let's go with some white noise from this Erica Synths black modulator module, and let's route that into input 2 of the mixer. Let's take a third noise source at this time. Let me go ahead and get a little bit closer with the camera now that we're actually putting some cables in. Hang on, guys. Okay. Cool. And let's go ahead and also maybe take this crushed noise from the Erica Synths black modulator and let's run that into this mixer as well. So we've got a noise source from the braids module, a noise and 2 noise sources from this Erica Synths black modulator. What we're going to do is we're going to run these into an envelope so that we can create just a really tiny little percussive noise hit, and we're going to sample that into the assimilator sampler, and we're going to start with that today. So let's see here. We're going to need to route the output of the mixer into the input of a VCA. A VCA is basically a voltage controlled amplifier, and we're going to use an envelope shape to open and close this amplifier to let our sound through. We're going to use a really tight envelope shape to do this. Put that into the CV input. I'm going to create the envelope using the Zadar envelope generator module, but you can use, any envelope generator module in your system to do something like this. Okay, we're going to need a way to trigger that module, so we're going to take a trigger from the Synths drum sequencer. I'm just going to use that same trigger to trigger a lot of modules in this session. So we're going to multiply. We're going to run this trigger signal into a multiplier so that I can run that out into whatever other modules we might need. Put this into the trigger input here, and this is trigger 9. So we'll put a little trigger on there. Cool. Now what we need to do is we just need to route the output of the sound that we're creating here with this white noise. We need to route that into a mixer that I can combine all of these noises into. And let's route that into the first input of this mixer over here. And we're going to take, today we're going to be recording into my favorite box for recording in here. Whoops, sorry about that. And that's the Akai MPC Live. So I've got just a mono cable plugged into the back of the MPC Live so that we can take the other side of this and just plug that into a mixer here. So everything I plug into the mixer we'll be able to hear today. Okay, let's start by getting some level coming through, shall we? Triggering here and here, and that's going to the CV in. Give me 1 second to figure out why we're not hearing anything yet. Okay. Well, I'm just going to start figuring out where we're missing the signal from. Bear with me for a second, everyone. We'll get this sorted. Oh, come on. Don't give me this today. Not today. It should be coming straight through. All right. Okay, so that's coming in, but we're not hearing it over there. I'll sort that for us. Is it here? It sure is. Okay. Okay, so I didn't have my levels totally set up. Sorry about that, everyone, on the mixer, this side of things there. But we are getting there now. Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to do a little bit of a, sorry about that dilemma there. I'll do a little bit of adjusting on the pitch of this noise here. This is, yeah, nice. This is the noise algorithm in the Mutable Instruments Braids module. And I've got that running into this little mixer here, and we can turn that up or down and hear that level coming through. Let's just make sure that I've got my other noise sources coming through now as well. Yeah, there's our white noise from the Synths module, and there's the crushed noise, yeah, from the Synths module. And I can make any combination of those three now. So let's start routing this back together. Output left. Okay. Bear with me for just a second. We're going to take the output here. Bring these up now. Fantastic. We're getting there. My envelope generator doesn't seem to be cooperating, so I'm thinking I might just swap that with a different envelope generator for now. See if this does anything to help us out. It's really just not liking that multiple. Is that what the deal is? Let's try this. If I use a passive multiple instead, does that just sort of fix everything for us? Trigger and the output. Let's just check. Yeah, it does. It was the fact that I'm using a powered multiple instead of a passive multiple. I'm not really sure why that was doing that for us today, but we seem to be good now. What I can do is I can adjust the length of the envelope that is opening our VCA, okay? And so that we could have, you know, if we wanted to, we could, whoops, sorry about that. We could have a, you know, really long type of sound, you know? Or a really, really tight, you know, just tiny, tiny little bit of a click type of sound. Can you guys hear that okay? Is that coming through the little, let me see if I can bring that level up now. All right. Can you guys hear that coming through? Cool. So what we've got is we've got a complete adjustment over the noise that is being put through this envelope. We've got just the noise from the braids module, and then I can blend in some white noise from the Erica Synths black modulator, and I can blend in some crushed noise. So we can get any type of, you know, noise sound that I want here. And what we're going to do is yeah, we're going to go ahead and sample this into the assimilator module at this time. So I'm going to put the output, instead of from the mixer, I'm going to put that to the assimilator. And instead of running our sound to the mixer, I'm going to run that into the input of the assimilator here so that we can sample this sound. If I go over to the sampling page, we can choose how much time we want to sample this for. And I just want the tiny, tiniest little bit of, you know, transient coming through. So I'm going to sample just 0.2 seconds of the sound. Yeah. Trying to get a nice loud level into the sampler. Cool. See about putting that sample we just sampled on the right channel here. There it is. Just a really nice tight little sample. Okay, let's go ahead and undo. Actually, yeah, let's go ahead and undo these now because we've gotten a nice little noise source hit to start us off with today. So we're starting off with a little custom noise hit that's going to be the basis of our hi-hat sound. So we're going to build around. Now follow me on this because we are getting deep. It's not near that simple. That's just step one. Okay. What I want to do is I want to go back to the mixer. Awesome. Okay, so that sound is now coming through. But let's start with a little bit of, let's get some randomization in this mix happening right from the jump. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the Squarp Rample sample player next. And the Squarp Rample is really awesome because when you put samples into its sample slot, by default, it plays back those samples in random order. Now what I've done is I've gone through my sample pack called Dean's Noise Candy, and I've trimmed out like some tiny little bits of noise hits here, kind of like the same idea that we just did with that white noise. These are like tiny little bits of vinyl crackle and tape noise and just some random noise. In fact, there's a couple of nature noises in here. One of them is way too loud. But we're going to go ahead and run this directly into the second input of our mixer here, and I can show you guys what the sort of samples that are in the Rample sound like, and how when I trigger them, they sort of play back in a random order. So then turn the volume way up here. Hit that little vinyl hit that just came through, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. Can you guys hear those little hits that are coming through and how they're different each time I trigger them? The fact that they're different each time I trigger them is what's really important here. What we're going to do is we're going to take an output from, let's see here, we're going to start triggering our sample here. We're going to run a trigger from the Synths drum sequencer into this passive multiple, not the powered multiple. And we're going to use, let's see, we're going to use this branches module right over here to start getting some random into the mix. I'm going to put the trigger here into the branches module. Now the branches module from Mutable Instruments is what they call a Bernoulli gate. And what that means is every time we send a trigger signal into it, it's going to kind of roll like a virtual die and decide whether it's going to send that trigger out of output A or output B. And this is going to help us get some random in the patch right off the jump. I'm going to go ahead and route output A into our noise symbol, trigger over here. But if you notice, it's not triggering, every single time because we've got the random here. And sometimes it's now sending this trigger output out of the B instead of the A. So we're going to start combining that with some neat stuff. We're going to take the output B and we're going to route that into the Synths hi-hats D module, closed hi-hat trigger. So now it's going to either trigger the noise that we sampled or it's going to trigger the Synths hi-hats module, which we're not quite hearing at this time yet, but we're going to fix that. We're going to take the output of that module. We're going to run that into a tiny little filter here just so that I can round off the high frequency content the tiniest little bit, and we're going to route that into our mixer here. Okay. Oh, I see what I did wrong there. I want that extra mixer for sure. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we've got our out. This is on 3. Yeah. Okay, now what we've got here on the Synths hi-hats module, let me see if I can turn this just a tiny bit here, is we've got some tuning controls and we've got some decay controls. So I can make that hi-hat, really low in pitch and really long. I can make the hi-hat really high in pitch and really short, or any combination of that using the CV input controls. We've got a CV input for the tuning of this hat, and we've got a CV input for the decay of this hat. Now, what I'm really trying to create here, guys, is I'm trying to create layers of randomness so that every time we trigger a sound, the system is spitting out a new and different hi-hat sound. Now, bear with me on this. What we're going to do, let's see here. I'm going to go into the MPC Live here, and I'm going to turn on a noise gate setting that I've got. See if we can't help a little bit of this noise to go away. In the background, that sounds a little bit cleaner. Boy, that white noise click that we sampled is very loud, so we're going to bring the level on that down just a little bit so it's a little bit more even with the Erica Synths hi-hat sound. It's a little better. Where's that other mixer? There it is. Just trying to even that out just a little bit there. We've got a lot more layers and levels to go here, so please bear with me, you guys. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get the rample involved here. Because currently we're only hearing either the Erica Synths hi-hat or the white noise that we sampled. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the rample is doing the same type of thing. And that sometimes it's going to trigger from the first slot of samples, and sometimes it's going to trigger itself from the second slot of samples. We're going to use this same trigger that we're triggering the first hi-hat with, and we're going to route this, we're going to route this into the second input on the branches module. And we've got two outputs here, so I can take one output and plug that into the first channel on the rample. We've got another channel that I can plug into the second channel on the rample. Start adjusting the level on those and making them hit way less often as well. All right, we're doing better. How's the level looking on the stream? Can you guys hear those little hi-hat sounds that are coming through, I hope? We are with you. All right. Okay, so can you hear now how we're starting to actually get some different type of sounds that are coming through? Sometimes it's sort of a really clean hi-hat coming through. Other times it's a, sort of a noisy hi-hat coming through. And every now and again, we sort of get those weird, vinyl samples that are blending with it. All right. We're going to go ahead and continue building on the levels of random here. And what we're going to do is I've got a whole bunch of SD cards that go into my sample modules here. And these are full of samples that I've prepared for today's session. This one here has 75 sounds on it. And what these sounds are, is these are sounds that I pulled from various sample packs of distorted kick drums. So these samples that we're about to check out right here started off as extremely loud and extremely distorted kick drums. And what I've done is I've ran them through a filter up to 10,000 kilohertz, and I've removed all of that low frequency content beneath 10,000 hertz, or kilohertz rather. So what that's doing is taking away, pretty much any hint that it used to be a kick drum, and it's just sort of leaving that layer of fuzz and dirt and sometimes a little bit of distortion on top of the sample. So we've, completely taken out any low frequency content, and we're just left with that tiny little bit at the top. And it sounds, if I get the levels right here, we start scrolling through these. There's lots of different ones on here. Again, these are the top ends of kick drums. And all we're left with now are just these tiny little clicks, right? And what I can do is I can use the same trigger that we're using to trigger everything else, and we can start maybe triggering another branches module. I'm really about the random, and I actually have 3 of these branches modules, so we can get pretty creative here today. I'm taking the first output from this branches, and I'm going to go ahead and route that into that that card over here that's now playing back any of those 75 different kick drum samples. There's not any modulation or anything happening at this time. It's only going to just play back the sample that is in the slot until I turn the knob, and we may or may not adjust that. Okay, we just want to get the volume on that new sound quite a bit lower so that it blends a little bit better with the existing sounds that we've got, because we're starting to, have some things that are now starting to hit at the same time as some of these different sources are starting to layer together. So we really want to keep track of the volume of the different sounds here and try to keep everything, consistent. The next thing we're going to do is I have another little SD card here that we're going to put into the second Tip Top Audio 1 sampler. And this one here contains 72 percussion samples that I handpicked off of a percussion sample pack that I've been working on, I don't know, for like 4 years or something. And it's got all sorts of like natural instruments, tiny little shakers, little tiny like custom tambourines, all sorts of like, vintage and tribal percussion sounds. And I went through there and just sort of picked out, sounds that might sound good when used in the context of a hi-hat. And so what we've got is we've got an entire 72 additional sounds here, and we're going to route that into an input on this mixer here. And let's see what this sounds like. Yeah, there we go. So we've got these type of sounds, real percussion sounds now. All sorts of, different pitches. Whoops, that's pretty loud. Different volumes. Okay, and we're going to get this into the mix as well by starting to trigger this through one of the branches modules. Let me just grab a couple more cables here. So that second output of this Bernoulli gate can go into that module. So now when the signal comes into this Bernoulli gate, we're either triggering one of the top end of those distorted hi-hats or one of those random natural percussion sounds. So more variety is going to start coming through in the sound again. You can really start to hear, the differences coming through now. Let's go ahead and see if we can't slow this tempo down so that they're not hitting quite as often. Give a little bit more room between them, for there to be some air. Exactly. And so see how it's creating a different random sound every time it hits that trigger now? We're going to keep adding to that. This one here is a sample card that has 88 old school hi-hat sounds on it. So like from the beginning of my career, like very long time ago, sample packs off of this. I pulled some classic old hi-hats. Who knows where these came from, right? And they've been filtered so that all the low frequencies are gone, and they are just, ready to hopefully combine with what we've got here and start slotting in. We're going to go ahead and route these into this mixer here. Whoops, that's very loud. And they're these type of sounds. So real hi-hat samples, from just back in the day. There's all sorts of stuff here. Some of these are sound a little bit like shakers as well. And we're going to need another random way to trigger these. So I'm going to take an output here from the branches module, and we're going to route that in. We're going to duplicate the trigger into this branches module as well. So again, this one trigger from the Synths drum sequencer is running into a passive multiple, not powered, and then I'm sending that trigger signal all out to these other modules, which are deciding, what sounds we're triggering at this time. All right. So now the sounds that are coming out are starting to sound even more interesting and even more robust and even more thick and even more like they kind of have a life or sort of like maybe a history on their own before we created them. They don't really sound like we're just pressing play on a drum machine, but they sound textured and layered and sort of, more interesting per se. The last card that we're going to get involved today is a sample card with 90 new hi-hats on it. And these hi-hats are hi-hats that I've made already using this exact same workflow. So these have been hand selected from the results. They've been EQ'd and they've been trimmed out properly, which I'm going to show you next. But we're going to go ahead and get these in as well. So we've got just that one more potential layer of sounds that we can pick from, or that, that the random results here can pick from, rather. We're going to be triggering that one. So I've got 4 different sample modules here with different amounts of, hand-picked samples on those. We've got 75 of those distorted kick drums with no low end. We've got 72 miscellaneous, really ticky and clicky high percussion samples. We've got 88 old hi-hat samples. I like old school hi-hat samples from my way or old sample packs. And then lastly, we've got 90 new hi-hats that were made this same way and now are getting recycled back in. Just want to remind you again that we've got those vinyl noises and a little bit of tape noise. There's 24 different sounds that, can be triggered potentially out of the Rample. We've got that custom white noise that can be triggered and mixed in here as well that we created in the very beginning from scratch. All we need is we just need a way to route that last card that I put in into the mix. So we're going to go ahead and grab that and let's route that into this channel here and give this a little bit of level. Again, these are the sounds that I've already created using the same method, so they sound pretty nice already and should be really nice for blending back in with this project. I'm going to go ahead and press play and we'll see about if the levels are too loud or anything. And again, every time the hi-hat triggers at this point, it's going to spit out a brand new combination of these results. What we're going to do is we're going to get a little bit of modulation into the mix so that we don't have to necessarily, because there's all these different samples on the cards that we want to, be able to pick between. We can, if I'm not mistaken, hold down play and get this to a flashing red. Yep. And now the CV input on all 4 of these modules is the CV input is going to change what sample is being played. So if I take, I don't know, like some really slow moving LFO shapes, just a nice triangle LFO shape, really slow, and we assign that a different speeds into so that the sounds will change at different times. If we route these all in here, this is going to start changing and rotating, randomly through all of the sounds that are on those 4 cards. So if you add those up, there's, more than 200 different sounds here that we have the potential to trigger, and these LFOs are going to keep those moving and changing the sound. We can also come in here and we can manually ourselves change the pitch up or down as those sounds are playing back. Let's see what happens here. We should be getting some even more random results now as these sounds are changing and scrolling through their possibilities. Still a little loud. I'm going to bring the main volume down. Can you guys hear how every time it hits, it's literally a brand new sound? Sometimes they sound fantastic, and sometimes they sound lousy. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit record over here on the MPC Live, and now we're recording. I can change the pitch on these sounds if I want, so we get a little bit more random results there. I can continue doing that as we're recording. I know this is kind of a tedious one, so thanks for your patience if you're not really into, sound design or creating sounds from scratch today. Change the pitch on some of these again so that we're getting, more and more different results as these sounds combine together in random ways. Mess with these pitches some more. Again, these LFOs over here are changing the sounds that we're hearing from the cards. So they're scrolling between, for instance, those, how was it, 72 distorted kick drums or whatnot, that we've, shaved all the lows off. Each time it hits here, we're getting pretty much a different sample. And it just randomly combines these sounds. Every now and again, we're getting that high noise click that we recorded into the sampler at the very beginning. Sometimes we're getting the Erica Synths hi-hat. Sometimes we're not. I can adjust the tuning and the decay on that to make it a little bit different as well. As we're combining these randomly, we can go back and still change these pitches some more. I'm recording this whole session. We've been, since we started about 1 minute and 45 seconds ago. We're going to record for about another minute and a half maybe, and just keep spitting out these random results that we've created with this method today. You can hear how some of them sound really nice. Some of them are like, not necessarily that usable, and we'll just edit those out during the editing process. Yes, this is Brian. This is Oct, Brian. Oh my goodness. I absolutely love this module. 8 LFOs in a triangle shape, and they're unsynced to tempo. But they're kind of tuned to each other in a way that they, sound pleasing when you use them together. Really awesome module for getting a lot of cool modulation into your patches. We can go ahead and remove some of these sound sources at this time. So I've just pulled the noise that we recorded in the very beginning, so that's no longer combining. We can start maybe messing with some of these volumes of our sounds here, just again to get different kind of results coming through. We can change some of these pitches on the samplers again. We've been recording for about 3 minutes. Tons of random sounds here on this recording. Yeah, you can. That's just it. See, while we can get any of these modules and put them in that same way, I've done this same thing and included the hat module. Absolutely. I've also done the same thing and included the cymbals module from Erica Synths as well. So if obviously this is more today of how I'm doing things and not as much of how I am, teaching you guys to do things. But I'm just kind of talking about this conceptually and showing you how I'm blending lots of different sources with these, pristine, clean sources, as well as like things like vinyl noise and tape noise and just general grit and some of these samples and some of these older sounds, so that as we combine, they really don't sound just like a clean hit that just came out of a brand new drum machine, but more something with a little bit of history inside of them. What we can do now is just label this Euro Rack. Whoops. This is blended hats. I think this is like 7 or 8 or something, but we can save this on my SD card here. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring you guys, let's see here, I'm going to bring you guys over to this section of the room, and we're going to dig into Ableton Live on my PC. I've actually got 3 computers going in here today right now. I've got, this is my main computer that I use most of the time, and it's also got Ableton Live on it, and it's got my main editing software, which is SoundForge. And I don't have that same SoundForge for the Mac, which is why, specifically, why this PC has sort of, still been my main sort of go-to when it comes to editing and whatnot. Okay, I hope you guys are still with me. Almost a found sound sort of thing. It is exactly like a found sound sort of thing. Well, exactly. and we're blending in, like for instance, the card that had all the percussion sounds on it. Several of those are basically just, found sound type of samples that I've recorded, and we've blended those back in. I'm going to go ahead, I'm in the MPC Live here, and I'm just going back to the menu so that I can eject the card that I just saved those sounds on. Okay, fantastic. So I've got all the samples on a file now, and I've got those on this SD card here. I'm plugging that into my PC at this time. All right. I hope you guys can still see and hear okay as we start moving around. Let me show you what I've got in this session before. Oh, please don't crash on me, Ableton, during a live stream. Okay, what we've got here is we've got several different tracks of exactly what we just recorded. These are just tons and tons of different hi-hats. I've got quite a few, as you can see, of these. Some of these I created in Ableton using kind of the same type of techniques as we used in the Euro rack just now, where we're blending things together sort of randomly. And this is literally like, I don't know, like 1,000 samples here or whatnot. But we're going to go ahead and add in that new recording. We're going to just duplicate the last track here. We're going to go ahead and delete what was on it. And then I've got, on each of these tracks, I've got the FabFilter Pro Q3 plugin so that I can do EQ work on these sounds. I've got the Native Instruments Transient Master so that I can do some work on the transient, which is just the initial tick of the sounds. And then I can kind of control the sustain of those sounds with this as well. And cool, let's go ahead and grab what we just recorded and drag it on to this track at the bottom. All right, and that's what we just recorded there. All of those hats are, from that 3-minute file. We're going to tell Ableton not to warp that so that nothing's stretched and it's just being recorded in the same way that we've already recorded it. I can go ahead and now we can just go File, Collect All, and Save, and it's going to embed now the sample that we just recorded. It's going to sort of embed that into this session so that it's not going to lose that file when it tries to locate it from my SD card again, for instance, because it will be on the hard drive. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to do some editing. So I'm going to go ahead and just solo the track that we just recorded, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at these hats here. What we're going to do is just sort of hear what we've got. If we find one that we like, that way it sounds, we're going to trim it out and EQ it. That first one is actually really nice. Let's just go ahead and grab that. And what I do is I grab the sound and I sort of just bring it over to the left here to get it, in its own sort of, place to look at on the screen, right? We're going to go ahead and loop it. And if I zoom in on it here, we can see that it's a little bit low in volume. So I'm going to bring the volume up on that sound. Can you guys hear the ticks that are coming through? I've got, let's see here, everything in the chat is all over the room here. I'm going to grab my iPad. Hey, HR Terror. All right. Can you guys hear this hi-hat okay coming through? I haven't done this on a stream yet where we're sort of over here with this computer. So hopefully that's coming through just fine. Please let me know. HR Terror says yes. All right. Thank you. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and edit this sound out. It's got a little bit of vinyl crackle in it that came through on the recording. And so we got to decide at this time, do I want to leave that embedded in the sound or do I want to trim that off the end of the sound? Yeah, it's pretty far away from the actual transient of this sound. So we're going to get rid of that vinyl noise and make it more of a tight hat. All right. There we go. Did a little bit of a fade out. Now we've got it a little bit of a tighter sound. But if you listen really close, there's almost like a brr, brr, kind of like a fuzzy, clicky type of thing happening here. And I'm guessing that's from, some of the other vinyl noise coming through in this part of the recording. And this is exactly what I meant about, creating artisan hi-hats that maybe sound like, we've sampled them in an old school way, like from a tape or from a record or whatnot. But we actually haven't. We're creating this type of vibe in the way that we are setting up the sound design for these sounds instead. All right, that's sounding pretty good. What we want to do, I think, is bring up this transient master and take the attack, that click of that sound, and make it not quite as harsh. I find that when I'm blending, quite a few different hi-hat sounds together, especially when we're blending it with that really high, custom noise that we created in the beginning, you can often get transients that are just really, really hard, tick, tick, and you kind of want to soften that up a little bit. I find that the Native Instruments Transient Master is great for that. I just kind of play the sound. You can really soften the attack a lot. But we just want to make it so it's just not quite so, um, clicky at the very beginning of the sound. I'm going to tighten that sound up a little bit more as well by bringing the sustain down on it. That's sounding pretty good there. At this point, I might start adjusting the pitch of the sound a little bit and see what I think, if it wants to go up maybe. I kind of like it right there at +3 semitones. I'm going to bring up the transient master again and reduce that attack a little more. Now I can bring up the volume on this sound. I've got a limiter at the end of these chains so that I don't, get the volume on these too loud. I can bring that sustain down even, the attack down even more now that we're bringing up the volume and I can hear it better. Now we can go into the FabFilter Pro Q3 and take a look at the EQ of this sound. I think by default I'm going to pull just a few more low frequencies off of this one. And I'm going to EQ just a few of these sort of resonant peak frequencies that are coming through at the top here. I hope you guys can see that okay. For those of you who might not be familiar with, sound design and sample editing, hearing this click just go and go, it might be really tedious. So if this isn't your sort of bag today, then I apologize for the tedium that can become of this sort of workflow sometimes. We're going to go ahead and render that out at this time. I'm going to select that little chunk. We go Control Shift and R to get to the render screen. I can just hit enter here, and I can put it now into the folder of hi-hat samples that I've been creating. We just got to come up with a name. Just do this something real quick. We'll just call this, to make something right handle. Cool. And then now that I've got that saved, we need to open up my main audio editing software so that we can check all of the editing on that and trim out any spare space around the sound. So the main software that I use for editing samples is SoundForge. They have this for Mac, but it's like not quite the same per se. And I've been using this exact software for like 20 years or something now, and I'm real familiar with the workflow and the shortcuts. So I'm certainly not, gonna do it with the amount of samples that I'm, editing. I'm certainly not gonna try to learn a new workflow at this point in the game. So I do a lot of work on the PC, and I do a lot of work on the Mac as well. So here's the actual sample that we've rendered out. I trimmed out some air at the end of the sample, and I can take a look at the volume. This is just a hat sample. I like to normalize those. And if we look really close here, we can see that there's just one tiny, tiny little like single cycle frame of this sound that's causing it to peak before the others. And I'm going to actually go in there on just that tiny little cycle. Yeah, right here. And I'm going to zoom in all the way on that and just grab that one tiny little bit here. And I'm going to bring that down in volume by about 2 decibels so that it's not peaking the sound. Fantastic. Then I can just normalize that again. That's just to sort of even it out a little bit. I zoom in all the way to the very beginning of the sound and make sure there's no air at the beginning of the sample. Now we can start playing the sample. I think we have too much air at the end still. Now, if you're not worried about, sample time, if you're only just trimming samples for yourself, then the air at the end of the sample, doesn't really make that much of a difference. But when you're trimming samples, to use in sample packs in boxes that may have limited sample capacity, you definitely want to get any of that air off the end of the sample that we can. And I always grab a little bit of the end of the sample depending on the sound, and we're going to do a fade out. So there's no possible way that we're going to get any clicking or popping. All right, that's sounding pretty good at this time. And we're going to go ahead and save. Now we're going to do that exact process one more time so you guys can really see what I'm doing with the editing and the EQing of the samples that I make. We're going to zero out this transient master and get it back to its, default state. We're going to take the limiter on our chain and get that back to its default state. And we're going to get the FabFilter Pro Q3 EQ back to its default state. For me, on hi-hats, it's just set already to trim off any frequencies below 600 hertz so that there's no, those super low sub-frequencies that might sneak through and we might not hear per se. We can now either, keep going on the track that we just recorded, or I can arbitrarily pick any of these other tracks in here. I'll just go ahead and pick this one here, and we can start listening for a hi-hat sound that sounds good. This track was samples that I created, relatively in a similar fashion, but using Ableton Live instead of the Eurorack. Ooh, that first one's nice already. It's got a little bit of a vinyl sound bleeding through. We may or may not keep that in the sound as we start doing the editing here. Just going to bring this over here and start editing this sound down. All right. We can go ahead and bring up the level by a tiny little bit here of the actual sound itself. And let's loop it so that we can start hearing it. This is a pretty loud, aggressive hat. I'm going to zoom in even more and get rid of some of that vinyl crackle at the end. All right. We are definitely going to ease up on that transient because boy is it hard. It's a really hard transient. We're going to make this hi-hat a lot softer. We're also going to bring the sustain on it down quite a bit and tighten it up just a little bit there. Hear how it's a lot tighter already. I think we'll adjust the pitch also at this time. Yeah, I think I'm going to bring that up 2 semitones. We're going to zoom in to the very beginning of the sample. All right, and do a tiny little bit of a fade. Again, we're just trying to soften up the attack of this sound a little bit so it's not quite as hard hitting. We're going to want our snares to hit really hard on that transient, and we're going to want our kicks to hit really hard on that transient. So we don't necessarily need our hi-hats to be quite as punchy. All right, that's sounding a lot better. And now we can take a look at the EQ of this sound. All right, we're bringing up the Pro Q3. And I can see that we have a little bit more a little bit more high frequency content in this sound that I would like. In fact, there's one peak already that FabFilter Pro Q3 is like, hey, pay attention, this is a pretty loud peak here. And it is. We're going to go ahead and tame that peak a little bit. I think I'm going to shave a tiny little bit more of the low frequency content off of this sound. I'm going to bring it up to about 700 kilohertz. And we're going to continue taming just a little bit of these resonant peaks up at the top of this sound here and soften it up just a little bit more. All right, that's sounding quite a bit better. I think we're going to take the transient master and bring that sustain down even more, tighten it up just that tiny bit more. Yeah, even better. And we're going to go ahead and render this now. I'll select the loop, hit Control Shift and R to render that out. Here's the folder that I'm saving everything into, and we just need to come up with a quick name real quick. Let's just call that, Mika or something. Just make something up real fast. And then we go over to the SoundForge editor so that I can load that sample up and do the editing on it. First thing we're going to do is zoom in to the very beginning, chop off any air that may be at the beginning of the sample. Everything's looking pretty good there, so I'm going to go ahead and normalize the sample to get it as loud as possible. But looking again, I can see that there's one tiny little bit here that's causing it to peak that I don't want. So we're going to go ahead and zoom all the way into that tiny little peak and just lower the volume on it by a couple decibels so that the main peak of the sound is at the beginning of the sound and not somewhere into the sound. We're going to go ahead and normalize this and start hearing what it sounds like. And go ahead and trim off all of that air real quick. Definitely can get rid of some more of that air. All right, going to grab this ending part here and do a fade out, fade out. I think it needs to be a little higher in pitch maybe overall. So we're going to go to Effects, and we're going to go to Pitch, and we're going to go to Shift. And let's do a shift it up by like, let's try 3 semitones. Yeah, better. Okay, cool. I'm going to fade out that end again just because I'm anal like that. And we're going to maybe just try to ease that attack at the beginning of the sound by doing a tiny little bit of a fade in at the very beginning so that it's, again, not quite so, robust on the attack. Oh, yeah, better. We're going to go ahead and normalize one last time, and we are going to go ahead and save this. And that's the process that I'm doing as far as the editing on these is concerned, guys. I go in, I pick the ones that I like, and then I, adjust the transient, I adjust the sustain of these, I adjust the volume in Ableton to get it as loud as I can without clipping. And again, we use this Pro Q3 to get rid of any of those, resonant peak high frequencies so that by the time these sounds hit my sample packs, they're as clean, processed, produced, mixed, EQ'd, and ready to use as they possibly can be. Okay. Now, let's head on over to the Digitakt and let's check out a creative way to maybe use, like, for instance, why do we need to have like such a robust amount of samples? Why can't we just, for instance, just use, one sound and just tick, 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 tick? And we absolutely can. You certainly don't need to use, multiple different hi-hats. Looks like I forgot to plug that phone into the power, so let me do that real fast. Bear with me, everyone. Sorry about the break here. What do we got? I got this guy. Okay, cool. Just want to make sure one of my cameras doesn't shut off here. Okay. Good deal. And okay, cool deal. So this is the Digitakt over here, and I've created a pattern rather in this. This is just the new bank that I'm working on for the Digitakt. But check out this hi-hat pattern in this pattern. Let me get the volume back up here and try to adjust these levels. Quite a bit of, reverb and delay on that. You guys know I love the reverb and delay. But if we listen to this part here, you can hear how it's completely changing and grooving. And this is just the hi-hats alone. And we're getting all these different, pitches, and we're getting all these different tones. And when we start adding in other sounds, listen to what the hi-hats are doing on the top of this groove. Now, the reason that these hi-hats are so animated is the sample that I'm using is actually a sample chain. Now, what is a sample chain? A sample chain, specifically for using in something like the Digitakt, is where you've created literally a chain of sounds that are equally spaced apart, and that instead of having, just one sample as you load the sample, you've actually got a chain of samples that we can pick from. I'm going to show you guys how to use something like this. We're going to set up, we're going to go to a brand new pattern here, and I'm going to clear out the sounds that are on these tracks by default. Cool. Okay, good deal. We're going to save the session at this time. And what we're going to do is just load up a hi-hat chain onto track 3 here. Now, previously in this bank that I've been creating, I've just been, putting individual sounds on all of the sample slots. So, for instance, if you want a kick drum, you'll load a kick drum, and then there you're playing that kick drum. But the benefit of a sample chain is that, you can only get 128 sample slots in a box like the Digitakt. So if we put a sample chain on a slot, now there's 12 samples in that slot instead of just one. And you can kind of get around some of the limitations for the quantity of samples that you can have in your sessions by creating and using this type of a thing. So here we're going to go ahead and just load the hi-hat sample chain onto the third pad. That's typically the pad that I use for my hi-hats. And here we've got it. And it's just called 12 times closed hi-hat. And that's because there's 12 samples on the pad. Now you might think this is going to get confusing and be difficult to use, but it's actually not. It's actually really simple. If we hold down the pad, it just plays all of those hi-hat sounds. But we don't want that, we just want it to play one hi-hat sound. All we need to do is bring the length of this sound down in between the first two sounds a little bit. And now we're just playing one sound. Now, the Digitakt allows you to change the start point of a sample, and you can do that like on any single step of your pattern, and that allows you to create some really interesting and robust, rhythmic parts and whatnot. But the control for the start point here goes up to 120. So if you divide 120 by 12, you get 10. So as long as we stick to divisions of 10, you can easily choose which of these 12 samples we're actually playing. The first sample is on 0, but if I take the start point, and you guessed it, if I put that to 10, now we are triggering the second sample at the second sample's start point. And if I take it and I put it at 30, or 20 rather, then we're triggering the next sound. 20. Okay, and so here we got the ability on one track to easily pick any of these 12 hi-hats. Now, why do we even care? Like, why is this sort of a thing interesting, right? Check this out. What we're going to do is I'm going to quickly try to create a hi-hat part here. I'm going to fix this tuning that I messed up and try to show you guys what I'm talking about. We're going to put this back to the very beginning of the sound. So it's just playing that very first hi-hat sample. And let's create a part. If I go into the record mode and I put in a trigger, it's going to trigger, that first hi-hat on the downbeat. And maybe we want that to, also trigger on this step. So I can just copy and paste that step wherever I want. Just hold the step, hit copy, put it someplace else, and hit paste. Now I've pasted that exact step in there. But let's say maybe on this step here, I don't want that, first hi-hat to hit. We can pick any of these other hi-hats by just choosing, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, etc. So here's 40, and there's that hi-hat playing. We can maybe make this a little bit lower in velocity than the other ones by just, bringing the velocity on that one step down a little bit. Maybe we can take the very first step in the pattern and bring that up in velocity a little bit, just a little bit, maybe like an accent, Maybe we want to put another hi-hat on this step here to get like an eighth notes hi-hat pattern. Let's go back to our source page and back to the start page. If I choose, again, any number that's divisible by 10, we can get another sound. So I'm just going to arbitrarily choose, I don't know, let's say 70. Right? I'm going to bring the velocity down on this particular step as well. I don't want all the hi-hats to hit, at the exact same velocity level and be really, really loud with no, what's that word I'm looking for? Dynamics. We definitely want those dynamics. Let's go ahead and copy that step and put that in, I don't know, over here. Let's go ahead and maybe put another step in at the end as well. But let's change this sound. Again, any division of 10. So I'm going to pick like maybe 110 this time. And because these hi-hats are mathematically spaced out evenly, the numbers divide evenly. And it's very easy to use these sounds. I hope this is making sense to those of you who are Digitakt users out there. Hasn't been a comment in the chat for some time. Am I still live, you guys? I know this one's maybe a little bit boring and not super exciting, but just if you can let me know that you guys are still there and that we're still live, that would be awesome. Let's put another one here, shall we? Yeah. Again, if we go back to that second page of the source screen, we get to see that waveform. And I can pick any of these numbers. We can pick one that we haven't chosen yet, maybe 50. We can maybe bring the velocity on this one down as well. And maybe we can just copy that one and put that in over here as well. Hear how we're starting to create a part that's evolving and a little bit, more interesting than just with the same exact sound, Let's put a trigger in here, shall we? If we can choose one of these arbitrarily, let's go ahead and pick 80. I don't think we've used that number on this yet. So again, these are 12 different hi-hat sounds that we're now able to pick from in one sample slot super easily. It's only taking up one sample slot inside of our project here instead of 12 sample slots, right? Let's go ahead and copy that as well. Maybe put that over here. Let's put another one maybe at the end, right? And let's go into that second page of the sample start. And let's maybe pick, 70. Let's bring the volume on this one down by bringing the velocity down as well. All right. Now let's get a tiny little bit more interesting. Let's go into the amplitude page here. And on some of these steps, we could adjust the panning and make our hats a little bit more interesting in the stereo field, right? So if I hold this step, I can adjust the panning on just that one step, maybe left 9. I could take another hi-hat sound, maybe this one at the end, maybe pan it right, maybe about 9 or 10. Do the sort of same thing over here. Let's pan that one 7, and let's pan this one the opposite way, 8 to the right, and just get a little bit of stereo width happening in these hats. You can hear that we haven't even added any reverb to these yet, but if we do, we'll get a little tiny bit of reverb in there. Maybe adjust that reverb a little bit. Just get a tiny little bit of ambience to get them in an acoustic space, a little bit of delay maybe. And I hope you guys can see how this is quite a bit more, interesting than, say, just tick, 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 tick with the same sound. You get my drift? Now we've got sort of, a repeating pattern. That's almost, playing different pitches of these hi-hats. That sort of repeat, We can do a little bit more creativeness by making the pattern longer. We can go to the page menu and make it a 2-bar pattern instead of a 1-bar pattern. We can function and page to get out of that menu. And now we can scroll between page 1 or page 2 of the triggers here. So for instance, page 2 could have more triggers involved than page 1. We could maybe add a little bit more variation as well by putting a re-trigger on the second bar. A really quick little glitch hit where it plays more than a 16th note. Let's see, maybe like a 30-second note. You'll see what I mean when it hits this trigger. Yeah, hear that brat? Now we get that at the end. Cool. So now I really want you guys to hear how we've created, a much more interesting and robust hi-hat part than just to say an open hi-hat on the backbeat part or just like a tick, tick, tick kind of part. By using, lots of different various samples, especially ones that, we've taken the time to blend that character and sort of vibe into in the way that we created these, you can really help yourself get some awesome patterns. And imagine, how the rest of your sounds are going to kind of dance around that hi-hat groove. If all of the parts in your track, for instance, are a little bit special in their own way, then that really adds up to a well-polished track in the end. All right. What we're going to do now, guys, is we are going to head on over to Ableton Live on my Mac. And this is where, this is like my main music computer. I don't do audio editing over here or like sample manipulation really. This is just where I'm doing music mostly. And I believe We are coming through on Ableton now. Let's see here. All right. Looks like there's 11 people hanging out in the chat. Can you guys still hear me? Are we still live? What we're going to do is I've taken a folder of the hi-hats that I've created in this way so far over the last week or so, and I've brought that over here, and it looks like we're having a little bit of pause as the computer catches up. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a whole bunch of these closed hi-hat sounds by just holding shift, and selecting a whole bunch here. And then I'm just going to drag those hi-hats onto a drum rack inside of Ableton. And it's going to spit those out across the pads here. So now we've got, several different sounds that we can pick from inside of Ableton. Hey, thanks, Lucas. I appreciate that. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a little bit of a hi-hat rhythm over here. We're going to do this in one of my favorite ways, which is like we're going to create a 1-bar pattern. We're going to just highlight one measure here, and we're going to hold, what is it, Command-Shift-M, yeah, to create a MIDI loop. And I want that to loop, so we're going to hit Command and L to get that 1-bar to loop. I'm going to make this a little bit more groovy and bring the tempo down to, say, I don't know, 118 to start us off with. Now, if we go into this window here, we can see on the left all the names of those hi-hat samples. And we won't hear anything if I touch the keys, but we can change that, so we can, by clicking this little headphone icon up here. And once that turns blue, we can now hear the sounds as we're pressing them here on the keys in Ableton. And we've got our basic grid to work from. I can right click on the screen and choose down here at the bottom like 16th notes. And now the grid is just going to stick to 16th notes. We can maybe pick something we like as like a default hat to start working with. And maybe just put that in on quarter notes, right? It's going to sound like this. Really simple pattern. Taking a look at the audio level that I'm sending out to you guys. Might be too high, so I'm going to bring this down just a little. All right, I'm going to take the, let's see here. We're going to make this hi-hat a little bit tighter by bringing in its endpoint. Yeah, nice. And then bringing up the fade out. Yeah, now it's just a really tight hi-hat sound, and we're going to kind of dance around this with some other sounds as well. I'm going to go ahead and bring up that Pro Q3 and take a look at the EQ before we move further. I'm going to bring off some low frequency content, and I'm really casually going to pull off a little bit of the resonant peaks from the top of that sound, just to tame it just a little bit. All right. Let's go back into this MIDI groove here. And what let's do is I'm just going to randomly pick some other hi-hats, completely randomly here. And I'm going to put those on notes that are not currently playing, right? I'm just randomly putting notes in on the 16ths here. I really like these three, actually. So what let's do is get rid of the other notes. Maybe put a fourth one in here. Yeah, that's nice. And Command D, and Command D. All right, now we've got an interesting little rhythmic part happening here. I'm going to take a look at the EQ on that. All right, I'm pulling more of the high frequency content out of that, just casually. And now we've got kind of an interesting groove happening, but we're not going to leave it at just something as simple as that. We're going to go ahead and do a little bit more first at this time. And we're going to grab the Audio Effects tab in Ableton. And then if we go over to the compressor here, and we choose the little arrow on the left of that, we can open that up and get some presets for the compressor. I like to use the Gentle Squeeze preset. I'm just going to drop that here after the hi-hats. I'm going to go to the second tab so we can adjust the threshold way up on that. So it's very subtle, Very nice. I'm just trying to keep these just a little bit more smooth and even sounding. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to plugins and we're going to go to audio units, and I'm going to go ahead and grab that transient master from Native Instruments again. And we're going to grab that and we're going to drop it right after the EQ here. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and in the audio effects section, we're going to put a limiter at the very end of this track just to make sure that we don't push anything over the 0 decibel limit. I'm going to go ahead and just tame the transient on these hats a little bit by pulling the attack down. Let's tighten them up a little as well by pulling the sustain down. We can tighten them, quite a bit with that sustain, or we can push that sustain up as well and make them really gritty. But I like them really tight sounding, at least, for this example. Yeah, cool. And now what we're going to do is we're going to grab my secret weapon plugin, you guys. This is, let's see here. This is Cableguys Shaperbox 2. And what this is this is a rhythmic plugin that that allows you to change the time, the drive, the filter, the crush, the volume, the pan, and the width of a sound all in real time. And what I like to do with this plugin is I like to just drop it on just about anything and then just randomly start scrolling through the presets. There's currently about 175 pages of presets, and these are rhythmic presets. And if you start scrolling through these, you'll almost unquestionably find something that does something, really interesting to your sound that you maybe want to work with further. So let's just see what happens. I'm just going to start grabbing some of these presets here, and we're going to start scrolling through these on the pattern that we just created. Interesting stereo phase happening there. Okay, there's a really interesting reverse thing that's happening at the end of that preset. So we're going to go ahead and get a little bit of that into our hi-hat part by adding a new track into Ableton at this time. I just hit Command and T to bring in a new audio track. I'm going to arm that audio track for recording, and I'm going to just tell it that it should resample its audio, or record its audio rather, here from the drum rack, our track 1 that has the plugin on it. I'm going to hit record, and then I'm going to hit record in Ableton. And there it is, that tiny little bit of reverse that I was looking to steal right there at the end. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and see what we'll do is just turn our first track into audio at this time. We're going to right click on it over here where the name is, and we're going to choose freeze. Okay, and then we're going to choose flatten. And what that does is that's going to turn its whoops, I don't want to do that. We're going to undo by hitting Control Z a few times, and one more time. Control Z. There we go. We get back to a normal state there. I didn't mean to leave the Shaperbox plugin on when I flattened that audio. So we're going to delete that at this time, and then we'll just flatten this again. So the part that we're seeing is basically just getting turned into audio at this time. I right click and choose freeze track. Then I right click and choose flatten. Okay, and now what we're seeing on the screen is just audio of what we're working with, which makes it a lot easier to kind of blend in that new little backwards stuff that I just trimmed out. What let's do is, this is currently just a 1-bar pattern. Let's go ahead and grab that 1 bar and let's start duplicating it out with Command and D so that it becomes a 4-bar pattern. Let's go ahead and grab this little reverse section, and let's just start moving this audio around and putting this to the very end of 4 bars. Do a tiny little bit of a fade out there and a tiny little bit of a fade out here. I can also see by default that the volume of the first track is louder than the volume down here. So I'm going to double click in that sample, and I'm just going to bring the volume of that up just a tiny little bit to sort of match visually with what we've got. Now we've got like a 4-bar hi-hat loop with a little bit of reverse turnaround at the end of the 4 bars, and let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, we're going to go ahead, I think, and just leave that little tiny quarter of a measure instead of half of a measure. And we're going to go ahead and extend this out a little bit so that it fills in that little area and just leaves this as a turner on for us. I also like to do a little bit of variation at the end of bar 2 of a drum pattern as well. So maybe what we'll do is just, grab these 2 hits here and repeat them. Maybe we'll also, let's see here, grab this little hit here and bring it, whoops, Command Z to undo that. And whether what I wanted to do was hit Option when I drag that so that it copies it over. We're going to go ahead and do a little fade outs here. Just put in like an extra little hit there and see what that sounds like. Just trying to create a more interesting type of hi-hat pattern than that average, eighth note tick, 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 tick with the same sound. Just seeing if I can get this last part to line up a little bit better. You can certainly get lost in this part of sound design, But I think you can see the idea here that, by loading in multiple samples that we're creating into a drum rack and then, using multiple samples to create a basic rhythm and then using a creative plugin to get a little bit more different and maybe unexpected results can give you just that, those different and unexpected results. Let's go ahead and try to do this same type of thing one more time from scratch, shall we? I'm going to just minimize those tracks there and we're going to go ahead and insert a new MIDI track by holding Control, Shift, and T to get a new MIDI track in the mix. Now we're going to grab a drum machine and we're going to drop it onto this track. I've already got the FabFilter Pro Q3 and the utility plugin that loaded on that track by default. Okay, cool. There's the drum rack. Now we can go back to the hi-hats. Maybe we can grab a few more of these hi-hats from the end, just a few this time, and we'll grab and drag those down onto the drum machine. Cool deal. Now we can create like a 1-bar MIDI pattern by just highlighting on the grid where we'd like to create it. We can go Command, Shift, and M to create that MIDI part. We can double click that MIDI part and now we're in the MIDI writing window at the bottom of the screen here. We can loop that 1 bar of MIDI by holding Command and hitting L for loop, and now we're just getting a 4-bar loop. You can hear some of these hi-hats have that vinyl. That sounds like we've sampled them off of an old record, but we haven't. Again, if you missed the beginning, we layered a lot of different sound sources together, including, things like white noise and things like tape noise and vinyl noise, so that the hats that we're, getting at the end have a lot of different, variation in their sound. Like it sounds like we sampled them from an outside source and not just a clean drum machine. All right, just kind of a cool start. I'm just transposing that just a little bit. I really like that transient master plugin from Native Instruments. So we're going to grab that again and we're going to put that on this track. So transient master. And this is going to help me right here just to soften up the attack of these sounds and make them a little bit more lighter. We can also tighten up these sounds, or we can make them a little, we can really emphasize the sustain and get them a little bit more dirty, I kind of like my grooves tight like this right about. That sounds pretty nice. If we wanted to, we could add a little bit of reverb and delay to these, you know. I have some just sort of built-in reverb and delay here. Cool. Hey, what's happening, Sky Tortoise Ferryman? Thanks for tuning in. All right. And what we could do is maybe add a few more different hats to this. We could maybe just arbitrarily pick some different ones here. Maybe bring the velocities down quite a bit on these as well. Just sort of like ghost hits now, basically. We can hit Command and hover over the note to bring the velocity down as well. Maybe put one in here. That's really low. Maybe put one in like here. I'm just trying to pick notes that we haven't used yet. Yeah, cool. All right. Now we've got a little bit more of an interesting groove there again. Again, certainly more interesting than if we just, used one hi-hat sample and put in eighth notes, I'm going to go ahead and bring in this Pro Q3 so that I can tame a little bit of the high frequency content from this. Just a little bit. All right. And now what let's do is let's go ahead and grab the Shaperbox 2 plugin to put on this. If we go over to plugins and we go to Cableguys and we go to Shaperbox 2, we can drop this on and we can just sort of hear if we can find something interesting that happens to the sound by just clicking through some of these presets. This one is really my secret sauce plugin here, this Shaperbox 2, because whatever you put on it, you can get some interesting results most of the time. We've got kind of an interesting rhythm appearing out of it with the halftime preset there. What let's do is see what we can do with that. I'm just going to add another track by hitting Control-T to add a new track. We're going to tell this track that it should record from that drum rack above. And it's got the, the Shaperbox 2 on it now. If I just go ahead and hit record, we can record that audio. Cool. And let's see here. What we can do now is maybe just take a listen to that new recording. I think when it hits that snare type of part here that it's a little loud, so I'm going to separate that into its own section with hitting highlighting what I want and just hitting Control-E to put a little slice there and make it its own section. Now I can take that hit that's happening and just bring the volume down on it, right? It sounds a little better, but let's even it out the tiniest bit more using that gentle squeeze on the compressor here. Very subtle here. Yeah, nice. Let's take a look at the EQ, and let's bring out any of those low frequencies beneath about 600. Yeah. Looking good. Now let's play these together. Let's bring this one way down in the mix. Whoops, I see what I've done. I haven't removed the Shaperbox from track 1, so we're just duplicating that sound, and that's not what I'm after at all. Let's try now, so that the original track is our unaffected hi-hats, and the second track that we layered on top of it is the affected hi-hats, to give us a little bit of more robust rhythm now. Yeah, better. We can combine both of these tracks into a group by highlighting both of them and hitting Command-G to put them in a group together. And now any effect that I put on the group will affect both of these hi-hats. So we can put a gentle squeeze compressor on this group and squeeze these hi-hats together. You have a little bit of glue on these two patterns. Make it sound more like one pattern. We can also go back to the plugins section and grab the FabFilter Pro Q3 again. We can grab my default setting here. Whoops, yeah, that's good. just going to do a tiny little bit of EQ on the high frequencies here, just a tiny little bit. And there we've got a much more interesting, type of hi-hat part than what we would have had if we just loaded in one sound and, put in 8th notes or 16th notes. If we wanted to, we could come over here and even put more reverb and delay on the group itself, which is affecting, both layers of the hi-hat here. You can create a whole vibe if you want and get a lot of extra stuff in the background going there. Something like this over a beat, though. Let's see here. What are we doing? 118 BPM. Let's see what I've got for something. Maybe I could just grab really fast so we could get an example. Ooh, maybe something from... Yeah, cool. Let's just find a kick and a snare part that we like here. Ooh, a big old halftime. What does that do to our part? Just a really simple and basic, almost glitch hop type of kick and snare pattern. Whoops. Take that group and bring it down. And so doesn't that sound a lot more interesting in the hi-hat pattern? It sounds like, those hi-hats have a life and a texture to them. And not just like something really plain and clean and simple that we sampled, for instance, out of a brand new super digital drum machine or something. I hope that this sort of process kind of makes sense and how I'm sort of approaching this stuff by blending a little bit of, different noise sources with existing hi-hats and with some other percussion sounds as well, so that at the end of the day, we're ending up with a lot more, custom and robust type of, sound design than we would otherwise. Now, I know not everyone, has a giant Euro rack system that they can just start, doing this type of sound design with. And I also know that not everybody's, super duper into doing sound design like this on their own as well. And that is definitely where I come in, friends. This is the kind of effort and energy that I put in, to making the sample packs from Electronisounds. And if you are, looking for new sounds to work with, but you don't like necessarily taking the time, or the effort, or, the editing per se, or the extra EQing per se on, your sounds, then, definitely the sample packs from Electronisounds that I'm putting out are a great way to get started. I don't personally know a lot of other sound designers who do sound design for a living, so I don't really know, exactly how much time and effort other, people put into the sounds that they're making. But this is really, I don't really have a lot of other hobbies, as many of you know. So this kind of stuff and taking the time, to experiment with the sounds and, taking the time to, record 1,000 new hi-hat samples to then go through those and pull out my favorites and whatnot is certainly something that I'm about. And yeah, so I'm going to check in with the chat if there's any questions at all, whether they be, Artisan hi-hat related, producing and Ableton related questions, Euro rack questions, iPad questions, EQing questions, any type of questions at all. If you've got any, now is a great time, as I think we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up the stream today. It looks like it was a pretty short one, actually, about an hour and 40 minutes. I was expecting this to be quite a bit longer, but I never really know, how long to spend on each section, because I don't want the ending stream to be, super boring. I know not everyone's super interested in learning, how Dean makes Artisan hi-hats, so I did kind of want to keep it straightforward at the beginning. But just, to recap, we started out by blending a lot of different sources together in a random way in the Euro rack. We used a custom blend of white noise and crushed noise and pink noise to create kind of like a hi-hat tick that we created from scratch, that we blended in with like the Erica hi-hats D module to get some drum synthesis going in real time. We used 4 different sample modules from Tip Top Audio that are playing back different like percussion sounds, and I used a folder of like distorted kick drums that I removed all of the frequencies beneath 10,000 kilohertz on, so it just left that top kind of fizzy dirt layer that we were able to blend in with some of those as well. And I used the Squarp Rample sample player, playing back some random kind of like vinyl hits and tape noise and some other type of noise hits, so we could blend those in with the sounds randomly. We recorded with the MPC Live. I do my editing over here on this PC using Ableton Live and SoundForge, and we did that. Then we messed around with the Digitakt a little bit, and then we messed around with Ableton Live a little bit as well. Like seeing you work in Ableton. Oh, thanks, Tony. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Hey, what's happening, PK? Thanks for tuning in. I am too late. Oh, sorry, Nils. It was a good one. We went pretty deep today. I'm actually pretty stoked that we got it done pretty quickly. I don't think it's gonna end up being too tedious. I've been going back through these streams now and putting in the timestamps so that they'll be, a little bit more relevant for folks who missed the stream on the first time through and who might just want to go back and reference the information. So the timestamps will be added to this video later today as well. So if you want to go back and just check out any of the different bits of information there. But I guess mostly the point of the stream today is just to show you guys, how much time and effort and energy I'm spending when I'm putting together the sample packs that I'm making. I know it seemed like we just spit out a lot of custom hi-hats really quickly with this setup, but I just want to remind you, behind the scenes, I have to take the time to prepare all of the sample content and edit all this originally. There's more than 200 samples that have been handpicked and hand edited in the source material that I'm using to create this stuff randomly with and reassemble. And that's really, really important as well. If the source material, isn't the correct source material, then I'm not going to get the right results here. So I spent a lot of time, like, days this week, preparing these samples so that I can use them in this way as well. I don't want you guys to think that it's just super fast. It's only super fast once you've done the legwork, per se. Alrighty. So I think we are going to call it. Boy, it's not even been 2 hours, but I mean, I've done everything I set out to do already. So unless there's any other questions, we are going to call it today. I appreciate you guys hanging out. I know not every one of you are budding sound designers, so sometimes these streams, might get a little boring or tedious. But I really want to, show in detail some of the things that I'm doing in here when I'm creating these sample packs and whatnot. Cool deal. Alrighty, I am going to go ahead and call it today. And until next time, everyone, thanks for watching. All right, we're going to go ahead and end the stream here. Thanks, guys. All right, see you next week.